Welcome back to the Cloudcast. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, along with our Cloud News of the Month ongoing co-host, Aaron Delp and Brandon Whichard. Guys, how are you? Welcome to December. Welcome to talking about November. Any news or anything interesting happen over the holiday weekend for you?
I think I just ate an immense amount of food, mostly desserts, and watched an immense amount of American football. And I call that a successful vacation for myself.
Yeah. I got to ask you guys. So, I mean, amongst you, is Thanksgiving the best holiday? I'm raising my hand for Thanksgiving being the best holiday. Brandon, it sounds like you're sort of in that boat. Aaron, where are you on holiday rankings? Do you prefer Thanksgiving? Are you a non-Thanksgiving person?
Oh, I'm absolutely a Thanksgiving person, but the problem is our family tends to go on, somewhere good for Christmas now.
Okay.
And so I don't know. I'm torn.
All right.
Well, not only am I a huge fan of Thanksgiving, I actually believe this is the one holiday we can export to the world. I feel like this is like it's just Thursday and Friday. Everybody takes off. It's just mostly eating involved. There's really
right.
There's some vague, we don't even need to go into history of why we have Thanksgiving. No, you don't even need to know what it is. Just like everybody take off Thursday and Friday. Go have a big meal on Thursday, shop, do whatever you want on Friday, watch sports. So I feel like this is the one thing or one chance to give back to the world is everybody in the world should celebrate Thanksgiving.
Well, and not only that, but I mean, work really shuts down like Tuesday because it's like, ooh.
Right, but don't tell them. See, that's the thing, Aaron. We don't say that out loud. We don't want the RTO police to show up. It's like, yeah, we get off Thursday and Friday, but then we sort of quietly work Monday through Wednesday. That's the little secret of Thanksgiving as well.
It does. I mean, if you think about it, it has everything we like, right? Like we get a couple of days off. We get to eat something that, I mean, and again, you don't have to eat turkey. You can eat whatever you want, anything that you want to have. It involves discounted shopping, which most of the world tends to enjoy. It involves rivalries with a sport. I mean, you could apply this to anything. Like I'm sure cricket in Pakistan could get behind this, or Pakistan and India could get behind this. Anywhere in Europe could get behind this. I agree with you, Brandon. We should, the backstory. Don't worry about the backstory about why Thanksgiving is there. Call it whatever you want.
Make up your own.
That's right. Make up your own. All right, we are going to. We've been talking for almost a year now that this is the time of year when if people are going to drop big news, and we're gonna kind of break a rule because usually for Cloud News of the Month we talk about the previous month, but this one feels like we can break a rule for it. Mr. Pat Gelsinger, former CEO and chairman of the board of Intel, has decided over the weekend that he's hanging it up. He's going to retire. And Pat, we thank you for this because we're only going to cover it for a couple of minutes here on the show. But guys, any thoughts on Mr. Gelsinger decided that the opportunity or the challenge for Intel was just too much to get through, to even get through the rest of the year? Thoughts on Pat Gelsinger retiring?
Well,
immediately.
My main question is just like, why did he ever take the job? I know money, but like he was already incredibly rich. So it's just sort of like, what was the point? But I do think the thing that I'm leaving with is like, I think Gelsinger, and I think we've talked about this on other shows, or maybe this one as well, was sort of like, he was an Intel loyalist, right? And I think we've talked about the idea that like, probably most people are saying Intel, there's like some plan to like break it up in some way. We won't go into the details on that today. But I think ultimately he's not the person to do that, right? He was a person that wanted to build it all together. And he laid out what I always thought was a very complicated strategy. I think Ben Thompson's covered this at length as well about like a foundry, build new chips, lead GPUs, like do everything, right? Somehow he was going to do everything and succeed in everything. So I think either he came to the realization it wasn't going to happen, right? That's not the board. Either the board of directors didn't like that, they wanted to break it up, or he just realized that I just can't do it. I think that's one or the other. And hey, retiring rich, never a bad strategy. So congratulations to him.
No, fully endorsed by the Cloudcast. What I want to know is, did this go down like over the weekend where, at some point Pat was sitting around with his kids and he was like, he's sitting around the Thanksgiving Day table and he was like, kids, I want you to look at this 78-page set of slides and plans that I have laid out for recovering. And one of his kids just said, Dad, it's too much. It's just too much. You can't do it. So did this come from internal, right? Or was this, he went for, whatever the weekly meeting he had, and he started going into stuff, and here's the agenda, and the board just said, Pat, we're not going that way. We're not going that way. Like the way that it always does, like in movies where there's like an intervention or something. I want to know who ultimately kind of made the call on this. Because like you said, Brandon, there's a lot in the future for Intel, whether it'll be one Intel or four Intels or whatever it might be. But I'm always curious on these things, like who ultimately made the decision. Because usually, if you're the CEO and you run the board, like they kind of go with whatever decision you want to go with. But it does feel like one of those situations where it's like they were finally like, this isn't, at least the plan that you've got isn't going to work out.
Well, I'm just thankful because now it's officially a trend, 2 years in a row of big news Thanksgiving weekend, because Thanksgiving weekend was the OpenAI Sam Altman kerfluffle last year.
That's
Now
right.
we've got 2 data points. So it's officially a trend.
It is a trend. It is a trend.
Next year, I expect big news over Thanksgiving, like point blank.
Can we call it thanks quitting? Should we go with
quitting.
that?
There you go. Thanks quitting. I like that.
What the one thing I think is interesting, just because
Thanks
we
firing?
could go off on a way long tangent of like overreading the press releases, but the first line of this is, retired effective December 1st and stepped down from the company's board of directors. So I don't know, maybe I'm overly reading into that, but it's just unusual. Like, I mean, because, just to date, so, today we're recording on this is Monday, December 2nd. So obviously December 1st was a Sunday and it was the first day of the month. So maybe there were some contractual reasons that happened in December, but most of the time it's sort of like, the effective date's in the future, right? Like Pat will be stepping down in like, maybe it would be like, December 31st or January, and we thank him and he'll help lead us in a nice transition to the next leader, and he'll help, you know what I mean? So just the language here, it's like, it definitely, like if you're a journalist, it's sort of like you're making phone calls. You're like, there feels like there's like more to this. So maybe it is just a change of heart and he's like, I'm done, I want out. Or maybe it was the opposite, was just sort of like they did have a meeting and the board of directors said, hey, we're going to go this way. And he did think about it over the holiday and was like, you know what? I don't want to do this. I'm out. So, I mean, so I look forward to like all the business journalists, go out there, make your phone calls, get us the inside scoop.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the full recap in the January Cloud News of the Month, like we did with the
Yeah,
opening.
tune in. I'll tell you what happened.
That's right.
So,
the next thing this brings up is, and we've seen this in football. So for those of you not following football, one of the things that happens, and Brandon just talked about it, is oftentimes companies or any large organization that wants to return themselves to glory says, well, the person we should put in charge is one of the people that were there when we were, most in our glory moment, right? So that was part of the why Pat Gelsinger came back, was, guy who had, kind of built been a big part of the x86 business, was a well-known leader, had gone off, he was spun out of the, not the Gordon Moore tree, but the, the other tree. Now the problem they have is, you have the same problem that a lot of, colleges have when they fire the coach that was sort of the guy, is what's the Intel tree? Like who, this is where you start to get into situations in which the person who's probably going to come back probably doesn't come from the Intel culture. And that in and of itself is going to be fascinating, because changing culture for anything is nearly impossible. And trying to do it now with a company that's, not a startup, but running uphill is going to be fascinating. I imagine these are going to be names that none of us have ever heard of, right? They probably come from the TSMC, line or something else. But yeah, that's going to be fascinating. In fact, I don't even know we should bother answering that. That should probably be an entire set of shows, because now we got to deal with what's going to happen with the CHIPS Act. Who's going to be the new person? Will they break the company up? We've got a new president coming in who's got probably, doesn't really like the CHIPS Act to begin with, and all kinds of fun stuff, man. Chips are going to be a thing in 2025, Brandon.
yes.
It's going to be exciting. Well, I think you hit on so many of the good questions. I think that's the first question if you're on the search committee, or if you are someone they call to take the job. The question is like, are we breaking this into 3 companies, or do you want us to do one? Because I think anyone that obviously they will offer so much money, someone will take the job. So just like sports. But I would say if they're like, well, we believed in the strategy, we want to keep everything together, you just know you're just going to get paid for 2 years and you're getting fired. That's what I would say. It's like, if you're going to take the job, you're almost no chance of success, because either like either the strategy itself won't work or you won't be able to implement it. So that's that's going to be what I'm watching. It's like, do they make the move, or do they spend and most of the time, companies spend a long time doing the thing that they want to do versus what they should do. So normally we'd have another cycle of a CEO trying to keep the company together. More value is lost. And then after that cycle, we'll be like, okay, now let's break it into pieces.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'm going to pull their prediction show forward one and just say, I mean, him being out just signals they're going to break it up. They need they need the breakup CEO instead of the build CEO.
Oh, it's gonna be, and again, we're getting into stuff that we're speculating on, but I mean, you have to wonder how much of the future of Intel was almost entirely dependent on that CHIPS Act funding, which apparently has been sort of dragging a little bit, but is a big chunk of money. Can you even make a decision on? Well, I guess you gotta figure out somebody to be the person, but without knowing what's happening with that money, God, what a perilous situation to be in.
True.
All right. Well, listen, we've gone 11 minutes on that, which is great. Thank you for thanks quitting or thanks firing, the announcement that we didn't expect, but showed up for us. Again, if anybody else is planning on thanks quitting or thanks firing, we'd be more than happy to discuss it in the December one as well. So don't feel like Pat has stolen all of your thunder if you're planning to quit somewhere else. We'd be happy to cover that. I want to start with speaking of covering stuff. Microsoft and Azure hold a couple of events every year, right? Second biggest company in tech, maybe one of the biggest companies in tech. Why don't we ever talk about them? Why are the announcements that come? Is it? I was looking through the Ignite 2024 announcements, and there was a bunch of stuff in there. But I think about even just for the life cycle of how long we've covered this show, right? Like, why do their announcements never kind of catch on? Is it just that they have so many of them, or is it because if you didn't grow up in the Windows world, you're not like, I feel like that's a terrible reason for it, but like, why do I feel like there just isn't as much buzz about anything that comes out of the Azure announcements?
Well, I think it comes back to, a couple things. One, I think we do cover them when they make like the joint announcement with like OpenAI or something like that. That part is exciting. But I just think Microsoft is really a productivity company. So all of the things that they're generally focused in on are small productivity enhancements that for a very Microsoft-based environment, which to be honest, like are usually important, right? I mean, it helps people. It does make, people's lives better. Like we joke about like, oh, no one uses Teams or everyone hates Teams, but like we all use it. Like it's a very popular product and they make a ton of money. But I think none of the announcements are very inspiring, right? It's just always like, I was joking on another podcast about, this last round, like they were talking about, agents, AI agents. And one they talked about was like, and now you can have like a project manager agent that attends your meetings and like tracks the status of your projects and you won't have to do all this. And I was like, it was just depressing. You're like, oh my gosh, the last thing I want on my Teams meeting is a project manager agent asking me to update the status. And you're like, and it's just like, who wants to talk about this stuff, right? If that's the vision, and maybe it would be very successful, maybe it would be very helpful, but it's not fun to talk about. I don't think it's necessarily a world that people are super excited about versus all the other, crazy things people are doing. I don't know. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, I think you nailed it, because here's the thing. I was just thinking back. It was like, think about GCP keynotes or AWS keynotes, and you come away, there's always like one or two, I'll call them like inspirational or super forward looking or moonshots, or those things just tend to be exciting and they're good to talk about. But I can't think of Ignite ever really having that level. Yeah, it is. It's like, oh, here's the latest Copilot and here's the latest Office 365. And like I don't know. It just never feels inspirational. I think you nailed it.
Yeah, I thought about it because I was going through some of the announcements and I was just like, wow, how come I never even, we don't really ever pay attention to it. And it does feel like a weird sort of thing, but I think Brandon nails it. It's like, getting progressively better, slightly better at something over and over again doesn't necessarily move the needle. It sells a lot. People buy it. It helps them build a business case, but it just doesn't ever grab any headlines, which is very weird. Next thing I had on the list seems to be, again, this is another one of those that's going to, I feel like 2025 now that I'm thinking about it, between Intel and some of these, the FTC opened an investigation into Microsoft for antitrust. The DOJ is now pushing, these are all U.S. agencies for those of you wondering. So the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice is pushing Google to spin off Chrome. I think that this feels like we spent 2 or 3 years in which this current administration has been very actively trying to fight with this. We've seen Europe go after antitrust and anti-competitive nature. Do we think this continues into? I mean, this feels like it's going to be a very open-ended type of thing in 2025, because it does feel like both parties in the United States had some sort of thing against big tech, but I kind of feel like I'm like, usually they're very clear as to one of them really likes them and one of them don't. I feel like both of them don't, but for various reasons. I mean, do you have any thought on, like, is this something we should keep following, or are these companies so big that they're just going to like lawyer their way out of these things eventually, and we won't really have to worry about them?
Well, I think you have to follow the trend, and it's absolutely going to continue. But I think you nailed it on the motivations, right? The problem with it is going to be into 2025 and beyond, especially with changing of presidencies and changing of political power, is the motivation behind it and who the targets are.
Yeah.
We don't know, right? We don't know yet. There's always speculation around them, but things will absolutely change, and this will be an area we need to follow. But I don't think we can really predict the direction yet because there has been so many mixed signals sent. So,
yeah, I would say the other thing I see that's going on, I think I totally agree with your point about, like, there's just sort of general consensus that people are mad at these companies. And there probably is general consensus that these companies have some type of monopolistic power, right? I think you could probably convince a broad group of people that's true. Where there's no agreement is like, well, what do you do in those cases, right? Like, okay, so what would be a reasonable remedy? And any time a remedy of any kind is proposed, there are, for every one person that has a good idea about what they should do, there are 10 people telling you why that's a stupid idea and that will never work, and that's a stupid way to, do it, right? Like this idea of like Chrome is a good example. Like generally, I haven't seen anyone in the media arguing that this is a good idea, right? And so it's like, well, okay, well, but no one comes back with like another idea. So that coupled with just the legal system, I think this drags on for years. It's something that will certainly overhang these companies a little bit, but probably very little actually changes. Kind of like going all the way back to when we probably all started relatively early in our careers, right? Nothing really came of the Microsoft antitrust thing. Like when you think about it, it's sort of like at the end, it was sort of the market shifted and kind of, that's sort of like how that got decided. I kind of expect the same thing to happen, but it will take a long time and there'll be many legal cases. And of course there'll be lots of fun podcasting to do about it. But I don't know. It's just too complicated to like, quote unquote, fix one of these big monopoly trends. Yeah.
Last thing I had in the cloud news, although there's a couple of them, Brandon, I might have to get you to do this for me real quick, because you have an insight into this company Wiz, which I'd never ever heard of as of a couple of months ago, and then Google was going to spend like $20 billion on acquiring them. They're in the security space. You've obviously got some firsthand knowledge of Wiz. They're acquiring another company called Daz, which I don't know if that's just because of the Z's, or if there's good technical
3 letters with a Z.
What is going, like, who is Wiz, and why was somebody going to pay so much money for a company in the security? You know the security space pretty well. Like, what do they do that's so unique? Because that number seemed humongous for a company that we weren't hearing about all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question. I mean, the short story is the Wiz was a company founded by, I think it's like 6 co-founders, all out of Israel. They'd done a previous company, sold it to Microsoft. So this is kind of their second act, and they clearly are going for the if you will, I'm sure on their slides they have the $1 trillion market cap kind of thing, right? So they don't, I think it was 26 billion they turned down, and so they clearly feel like they can make it as big as possible. And I would say, what they've done and what they've kind of found is sort of like everyone has issues with security. I think they have a really good marketing push around how they're sort of, if you will, the data dog of security, if you will, or sort of like, maybe that's even too small a niche for them. They sort of want to become that. And I think they have successfully built some good technology that they started with, but then they are aggressively acquiring things like we're talking about here today. And so their goal is to really just become, I would say, the roll up, right? If you will, like they want to roll up and become if you will, the de facto security company everybody has going forward. And I think and this is a case where I think the marketing has probably been better than the products. I know they would definitely not agree with what I just said there, but I think they have just done a fantastic job of sort of like, if you will, presenting themselves as like, we have everything that you need for security. If you're not using us, then you're going to be the one that has the big data breach and you're going to have the big problem going forward. And I think they've leveraged that to really expand out their product portfolio. So I expect them to do extremely well. I think they're hitting on all cylinders. So we'll see what happens, but that would be a good, if you're making a bet for 2025, I think the Wiz, having a huge IPO or, getting extremely big would be a good bet to place.
So Brandon, follow-up question for you on that, because it just occurred to me while you were talking about that. is the trend in cybersecurity and security in general just to be these big roll-up companies? Because now if something happens, it's one throat to choke or one finger to point to or one company to sue, or like, is it the whole idea of like, hey, building these big suites is kind of the trend in security now?
Well, I think it's kind of always been the trend in security. Like if the security landscape is probably even more fractured than, like, if you will, quote unquote, the cloud landscape. Like literally every day I read about another a company, security company, often out of Israel, starting, right? And they usually start in a very specific niche, right? Like container security or like a very specific vulnerability. And what happens is the CISOs, who are ultimately chief information security officers, they're ultimately, you know, tasked with like trying to make sense of all of these things. And they are just human beings like all of us. And so they are constantly looking for like, well, I can't do business with like 400 vendors here, right? But I actually occasionally do see things or security problems that I do need to address, because as the technology comes out, so just pick containers, right? Containers has been around for a while, but like, how do you secure the container, right? How do you do all of those things? New solutions will come out. So I think there's a general understanding by CISOs, like we need to be doing this, but they're looking to partner with someone that can provide them the largest portfolio of things, because they just cannot manage all these different relationships. And I think that's where the Wiz is really doing a good job. They're sort of like, we're going to roll these things up. We're built on technology. And then that founding team does have the credentials to say, like, we've done this before. And, you know, certainly even the Google offer to buy them sort of gave them even more credibility. Even in the fact that it didn't go through, it was just like, oh, wow, Google thought these people were great. So if you're a CISO and, you know, if you will, quote unquote, want to do something safe, you want to make sure you've done the right thing, working with Wiz and using all their products would be a real safe way to go. Now, inside of that, you know, inside of all these security products, you know, some of them I think are just so complicated that, you know, I question, because I've been close to a lot of these where it's just like, well, you get close to these and it's like, I don't know, it's like a lot of different security things. It's like, we're doing a lot of weird things here, but I'm not sure we're that secure. You know what I mean? It's sort of like taking off your shoes at the airport. It's like, we're doing this, but I'm not sure like we do it by doing all this, we're more secure. So that's, you know, an ongoing issue with all security products though.
All right. I'm going to jump over to the AI stuff, and we're 22 minutes in, so we're not going to cover a lot because there wasn't a ton of things. I felt like if I had to boil down November from an AI perspective, it was NVIDIA announces they made a lot of money. So congratulations, you're now on the we make a lot of money thing. $35 billion for the quarter, up 94% year over year, sold out for some large, long period of time. The only thing that kind of felt like it came out of there was they did sort of announce, or they did sort of admit that, hey, most of our customers are the 4 or 5, you know, sort of big players that you would expect. It's the big cloud providers. It's Facebook. It's what's it, Gra or X. And so now they're saying, well, we need to go after enterprise. And so you sort of wonder, you go, okay, cool. And so now does that mean that you have to start coming up with use cases that the enterprises are going to use on top of these, or what is it, or is just we're going after enterprise just sort of the de facto thing when you run into some sort of, you know, a little bit of a wall? Because people were like, seems like you're a little bit consolidated on those 4 or 5 customers. Are you going to expand on that? Is there anything more to read into the NVIDIA earnings other than, hey, congratulations, you know, you're making tons of money?
Well, I'd say, I mean, the biggest thing I think is this comes back to what, you know, you've been talking about this, Brian, on your Sunday conversations. It's clear, right, that NVIDIA makes all the actual money, right? Everyone's giving them the money. They have 4 or 5 people that are giving them tons of money, but those 4 to 5 large companies have not created profitable businesses. And this is the Jensen sleight of hand. Jensen will always say, like, if you're a day late with your next LLM, you're not going to be valued that much. He never talks about your profitability. He always says valuation, right? So he's always making you believe if you do this, your valuation will be lower. But he knows that, I know, I'm sure, like we put truth serum, he knows that, like, if you're earlier, you're not making more money. Your business is not more profitable today. So I think it's like an incredibly interesting and, you know, if you will, unique problem. It's like, here you're sitting on top of this, whatever, however many trillions of dollars NVIDIA is, right? But you're dependent on these 4 or 5 companies eventually creating profitable businesses. But nobody knows what the profitable businesses is. And couple that with, like, I don't know if this is true, so I'm just going to say, like, the industry has generally started to say that the progress we're making on the latest LLMs is slowing down a little bit, right? So we're not seeing the giant leaps that we're going forward. So it's like, well, like, it's kind of like we kind of have those LLMs we're going to have for a while. They may only get slightly better, but I want everyone to keep using this, right? And so it's like it's if you will, if you pull out a card in this deck, right? If suddenly the 5 vendors are just like, yeah, we don't see a profitable business here, you're going to see that be reflected in NVIDIA's stock and earnings before anything. Now, it'll take a couple of years to cycle through. So I think that's like a really interesting place we're at. So either two things happen. One, we are where we are, and like, yeah, NVIDIA in 2 or 3 years is going to like, massively go down in revenue, and that'll affect our valuation. Or we're just at a little like plateau here for a few months that we just can't quite see the future, and someone's going to come out with either the better LLM or something even more interesting to use with AI. And it's like, I have no idea. If I knew what was going to happen, wouldn't be podcasting. I'd be making tons of money in the stock market. But I do think that's like, it's an interesting moment here, focal point from between 2024 and 2025. What do you think, Aaron?
No, I'm going to focus on the enterprise use case for just a second too, because in my mind, there's 2 big problems that just keeps the revenue on these big 4 or 5. One is still availability. Brian, you mentioned it, like, hey, they're sold out for the next, I don't know, year or 2 or something like that, right? If you're an enterprise, your only way to do this really is like go do GPU as a service or go do them in the cloud, because it's still hard to get the high end, at least GPUs. The lower end ones you can get. But so you have a supply chain issue that you'd have to solve before you can get mainstream enterprise. And all of the supply chain is going to the big 4 or 5 right now. So you have this like self-fulfilling or cyclical problem. And then second, when it comes to ROI on enterprise use cases, like, I mean, let's be honest, chatbots aren't a good enterprise ROI. And that's the one everyone still talks about, and LLMs and Gen AI. And so until we get to the point where we identify, hey, here's the 3 or 4 enterprise class use cases with a good ROI that everyone wants to go develop, that is in a good return on investment, super, super quick. And it's not just FOMO and Jensen telling you you're falling behind. Like, that's going to be the big problem. You got to solve for the use cases, and you got to solve for supply chain before you can get the enterprise.
I'm looking at it right now. NVIDIA is worth about $3.3 trillion. Intel is worth $107 billion, and they have a pending $50 billion contract with the U.S. government. Why not just buy them? I mean, essentially, you're buying them for $50 billion.
I think they would, but I think the antitrust, would be the answer to that. I don't think anyone would let them do that, right? So it'd have to be, I think, what was the other one? California company. I just forgot the name of it. Anyway, it makes the chips.
Not Broadcom.
The competitor Broadcom. I'll think of it later. But anyway, I think they were the ones that have been rumored likely to do it, right? Because that would be a place to do it. But who knows? But again, I think if you're just kind of how we started the conversation, if you're one of these large companies, you're like, do you really want to start fighting with the government? Is that worth it? You know what I mean? And also too, so maybe, but maybe once they break things up a little bit, maybe there would be digestible pieces that you could do. And even if they did it, the people that help break up Intel could sort of like go have some pre-meetings with the FTC and others and be like, okay, if we break it up this way and we make these parts for sale, are you going to be okay with that? So we'll see. Qualcomm's the company I was trying to think of.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Well, there's another one out there too that does stuff, but I don't think there's just another fab company that does it out of California.
Maybe you hit on a good one, Aaron. Maybe we should make that prediction. AMD buying Intel. Oh my gosh, that would just like, for the people that follow chips in the internet, that would be like mind blowing. But who knows? Yeah. Weirder things have happened.
They could buy a chunk of them. I mean, if they get broken up, yeah. Well, the other news this isn't even news. I feel like this is like speculation or so forth that was floating around this month a lot is the progress in AI, well, it was framed this way, is the progress in AI slowing down, which sort of was the, hey, we haven't seen a new, gigantic, what do they call them, foundation, kind of frontier model, state-of-the-art model, sort of the biggest and baddest. There's speculation now all the way up through, the news and the VCs and so forth that like the pre-training stuff is starting to slow down. Do you feel like this is just, kind of more just speculation to get people, wondering about like, hey, what's going on with AI? Or, like I sort of heard it and I was like, actually, I think if this is true, and again, it's just sort of like test results and data and stuff, like that is a good thing, because the longer we sit here and focus on like, how big are these giant models? How much do these giant models cost? It's less time that anybody is focused on like, where are the applications that are coming out of this thing that aren't ChatGPT? But any thoughts on the speculation that like some of this stuff is slowing down, and you know what that could mean from, you know, just from a next steps in the industry perspective?
I'd say, you know, it's one of these things, like the honest answer is like nobody knows. Nobody really knew that ChatGPT was going to be such a big hit or what it was going to do. If you go back to that, like all you need is attention paper, no one really predicted the outcome of that. So it does. The problem though is it does tend to like tell a story I think many of us kind of believe. It's like, yeah, we've seen a lot of these things before and we've seen a lot of promises before, but it generally kind of fizzles out at some point, right? Like someone's like, the latest and greatest, like, you know, semiconductor or something like that. It's like, this is going to change everything. And then like, well, didn't really work out. So there's a little bit of like, I think we all have to be careful, like pretending that, applying, if you will, our previous experiences to this. But I kind of believe, and, you know, you've been talking so much about this, Brian, I've been thinking a lot about it, is that like, probably the use cases will come from like out of nowhere, right? Like the biggest one as I've said on other podcasts just around, would be like self-driving, right? Like full self-driving, like there being some breakthrough where it's like, yeah, we got over a hump and like now everyone can have full self-driving. Because that's like, if you will, if you think about like the cascading effects to like our lives, because, you know, all the things around parking and travel and all that would be so huge that it would be like, wow, oh, that was a huge thing. But beyond that, it's like, you know, there could just be someone sitting out there, and they always talk about biotech and things like that. So because we talk about biotech, it's definitely not that. It'll probably be something off to the side where it's like, oh, if you apply it to this problem and the AI got good enough that like that is potentially the big kind of just step change we're all looking for. But yeah, I mean, on the LLMs and stuff, and Apple's a great, I think, test case from here. I'm sure many people have iPhones. Probably many people have tried out some of the AI stuff on the iPhone. And it's like, it's just very, I mean, it's kind of boring, right? It's just very unimpressive. You're not like, this is like, right. And especially Apple, right? They spent so much time talking about Apple Intelligence, and you're like, this isn't really that, it's not even that interesting. So, so something's out there, but we just have to wait and see.
Yeah. My favorite, I think it was Twitter or X or Blue Sky comment was like, it's very interesting on the Apple Intelligence that every commercial they have out there essentially is just like dumb people doing basically slightly better than dumb people things in their commercials. Like that's the way they want to sort of portray Apple Intelligence. So you're like, oh, okay, all right. They're not shooting for the moon. They're just shooting for you going from like a C- to a C, right? A B- to a B.
It has, but I think at the same time, we should always just like take stock of like, it has revolutionized how you write code. Even as like I quote hobbyist programmer myself, I am blown away with like how much faster I can do things that I want to do. And so there are these things that are like, I think we've just accepted it's now kind of boring, but I'm like, wow, if you write code for a living, absolutely fantastic. And I do. I actually enjoy, I'm always up for a better Grammarly, a better proofreader, somebody that, so those things are good. They're just not life-changing yet. Right. And that's the dilemma, right? It's like Jensen is talking about life-changing. I'm talking about over here. It's like, oh, great. You've improved my grammar, you know? And it's like, well, I mean, it's important. It's just not life-changing.
Brandon,
right?
I'm going to disagree with you on Grammarly though, for somebody who was a computer science major and can't write anything without a spell check. Grammarly is life-changing. Just so
well, listen, hey, you and I can start the spell check maybe being the only reason I graduated college was a spell check. Like I'm like, you know, I feel like a founding member of that club. So yeah, I mean, I feel like the kids, you know, again, to talk like the old man, the kids today have it so great. It's like, gosh, not only will this, you know, it's so nice to find all the other mistakes, the homonyms. You're like, oh, this is so great. I wish I'd had this when I was in high school. So it's fantastic.
But I'll add this though. So I think like in the LLM category and the Gen AI category, yeah, absolutely, things are slowing down. But here's the thing. I think the small language models, and we've talked about it a little bit before in the past, and then what is being referred to now as agentic AI, so AI agents, it is starting to be the next step. Now, is it a next step with ROI? I don't know yet. But the whole idea of like, hey, taking something like Gen AI, summarizing something, and then it kind of predicting if it's like, hey, do you want me to take this next step and generate this or do this for you kind of thing? Like I could see that. But again, I struggle with ROI, even on the take Gen AI and add a couple steps to it. I'm still not sold.
Yeah. But I do think a way for 2025 for everyone to like look at this and think about it is like, just know who the messenger is about this. Because the venture capitalists and in turn the cloud providers absolutely need AI to be the next big thing. They're so all in on these things. So it's sort of like, and Jensen is the leader of that group, right? It's like, they don't, it's not like they just believe it has to be true for them, right? And it doesn't have to be true for us. Like, we can continue to look, be like, what can I do with it today? If you're writing code, like I said before, it's great. It's not life-changing. Now, at the same time, I do think, and I've used this, the best example I have is Waymo. Like, there is a Waymo here in Austin now where I live. And it's like, it's pretty amazing. You see the Waymos driving around, and I know it's been out California before, but those things, like, you can actually see them happening. You're like, wow, if everyone had, if there were like 1 million more Waymos, things would be a lot different here. And I think that's a reason to be excited. And because, again, you can just kind of see and use these things for yourself. The same thing. It's like, some of the LLMs are good, some of the others. So I just think it's just like, as we're listening to it, and I do think the venture capitalists, the CEOs, they always get, a disproportionate amount of airtime. That's why you should be listening to podcasts like this, where we don't have any agenda. Like, we don't have to have it succeed. So it's sort of like, just like, if you will, use the products and follow the money. Are you seeing products and things that you've never seen before that are impressing you? Probably an indication things are going to happen. Are you just hearing at the reInvent about how AWS has been using AI for the last 20 years, and then they give you 30 announcements about new products that you're too confused to use? Probably not an indication of success, right? So use that, like, as you kind of go through the year, be thinking about that.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, we did. I was worried when we first got started, before we heard of the news of Gelsinger, we weren't going to even be able to get through the show. There wasn't tons and tons of news in November. I think people, kind of were, either focused on closing the quarter or focused on closing, their planning for next year. We did get a good starting point, and I will throw out. I'm looking at the pre-announcements for reInvent. So we're going to do a show about reInvent. Looks like there's about 60 or so that didn't make the cut for being good enough to be in the new CEO slides. But, I'm sure those folks all worked very, very hard and built some cool features. But it looks like 60 pre-announcements went out today, or at least went out yesterday on Gelsinger Day, and then the rest will go out on I guess Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday when the keynote starts.
If you're at AWS and you're in marketing, do you think like that's like you feel like you failed if you didn't make the cut? Like,
no, I think you're. I think if you're
below the line.
I think if you're a product manager and your thing made below the line, you're probably not. I'm sure you've failed on at least one or two of the AWS or the Amazon. What do they call them? Golden rules or whatever.
Yeah, you will not be promoted.
Well, and again, like, this is where it's like, does that press announcement really could have just have been an email? Like, oh, the new default size for, a queuing window of something is, like, oh, okay, cool. Just put that as a bullet point in a PowerPoint somewhere. It doesn't need its own press release. But anyways, all right, boys. Well, thank you very much. Thank you as always for filling in. It's going to be a lot of sort of end of year stuff we're going to do here over the next month or so on the show. So we're going to cover AWS reInvent. We're going to cover some year-end stuff. We're going to go cover some predictions and so forth. But Brandon, as always, thanks for joining us. Thanks for filling in some stuff. Folks, if you're not already doing it, I know we're seeing some folks jumping over there. Go join the Software Defined Talk Slack. You'll get the easy fill in on everything happening within the month, and then lots of good conversations. But go follow that. Go listen to SDT and anything else, guys. Any last predictions? For what may be coming up in the next couple of weeks or so forth.
Last thing is just like, don't forget about Thanksgiving. Let's make it a global holiday next year.
That's right.
That's our mission. That's that's the kickoff for this call. Thanksgiving, global holiday next year.
There you go. Yep. Thanksgiving and thanks quitting. I think we're going to get these things trending. We've now got a couple of data points. All right, boys. That's good. Folks, thanks for listening. Thanks for following the show. Thanks for helping us grow the community. And with that, we will talk to you next month.